1
O
O 3
point
point
5
5
F
F
M
M
New Haven
New Haven
streaming
Slimming
live
Live
at
at www. dot
New Haven Independent.
No Sherry.
Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline Hamden. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Cory O'Brien makes Hamden tick. He's the majority leader of the Legislative Council. He's running for re-election in a contested Democratic Party primary on September 10th, and he's here in the WNHH studio to tell us all about that. Welcome, Mr. O'Brien. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi.
Had a few minutes to get to know you a little bit, and it's a real pleasure. And I want to also thank New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So what does a majority leader do?
So the main role of majority leader is to represent the majority caucus on the Legislative Council.
Democrats.
Which is currently Democrats, yes. So it's 13 of the 15 council people are Democrats. So my role is representing the majority of the caucus.
So basically what you guys say you're going to do in a back room is going to happen.
Well, first of all, I fundamentally disagree with the backroom dealing and
I'll
not
tell you why I
discussing.
got a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
In New Haven, it's also true that everyone's a Democrat. You're 13 and 15 because minority representation rules.
Yeah.
They have a party caucus, quote unquote, before we have Board of Alders, you have Legislative Council, Legislature. Before every meeting, they have a private party caucus, and they hash out why they will or won't vote on public issues. And then they line it up, they decide it. Then they have the official board caucus where the public has to listen in. They don't say anything. They've already decided. Then they have a meeting, and they don't say anything there either. They just work, and the public doesn't really see how it gets done. Is it different in Hamden?
So I think historically it was similar to that, where a lot of the decisions were already not hashed out, but people came with pre-decided opinions on how they were going to vote. There was very little discussion and debate publicly. Obviously, there was some, but the current makeup in this last term, which is ending in November, has 6 out of the 13 Democrats are new, and most of the new Democrats have a different philosophy. Basically, everything that's discussed behind closed doors should be repeated, debated, discussed publicly, right? We want to encourage public participation and transparency. And that really requires, public debate. Sometimes, heated debate. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with heated debate sometimes, as long as it can remain respectful. But there's differences in opinion, and we shouldn't be expressing those opinions behind closed doors and then coming out and voting as a unified body. We should be expressing the dissenting views and having those debates on these important issues publicly.
So dissenting views need to be heard.
I fully think all views need to be publicly stated. It shouldn't be just behind closed doors.
As majority leader, as opposed to the president of the board, you're, I'm guessing, in charge of a caucus of Democrats, right? When you meet privately about the meetings, and then do you call bills up for discussion from the floor of the board? I mean, what exactly are you tasked with doing?
So yeah, I do run the caucuses. However, my philosophy has been to limit the caucuses as much as possible. We'll caucus on some important issues, but we really try to strive from even making decisions or coming to a consensus in a caucus that really should all be discussed publicly. So we've tried to limit the amount of caucuses as much as possible. There's a lot of important things going on in Hamden, so we've had to have some caucuses, but we try to limit it as much as possible so we can foster that public participation.
Now, Cory O'Brien, what I didn't know before you came on today is that this is your first term. You've been in elected office for only 2 years. You're
Correct.
one of those 6 new Democrats out of 13 on the board.
Correct.
On the council. How did you get to the majority leader when you were a newbie?
Yeah.
Don't
Not-
they want someone who's like been around and run things at meetings and see how they got on the inside?
So not only am I one of the new Democrats, I was not involved in any type of town politics before 2 years ago
Wow.
when I decided to run. So because there was such a large turnover, if you will, right, a big mix of, I would say, younger and more progressive Democrats that came on the council, right? When discussing party leadership, not only council leadership, president pro tem, but also party leadership, it was really, the goal was to kind of have, a mixed representation. Some of the people that had been around for a while, that were more seasoned, as well as some of the newer people. And the president is Mick McGarry, who's been on the council for a few terms. And I decided to run for majority leader to represent some of
So
the
you had to
newer
get one of the
people.
older people to support you.
I believe,
If you had 6 out of 13, you need that 7th vote.
right.
Who'd you get?
There was multiple the existing council members that supported me. It was pretty unanimous that supported me for the majority leader.
So now you've done it 2 years. You came in idealistic. You call yourselves younger, more progressive Democrats. Have you seen and experienced anything that changed your mind about how it was going to work after you first went in?
So one of the biggest changes that I think some people have had a hard time adjusting to, and change is hard, right? Everyone can attest to that. Is the shift in mentality, as we spoke of, right? Before, a lot of these intra-party debates were handled behind closed doors, and there was not discussion and debate and differing points of view in a party, where those of us that are newer want to bring that discussion and debate to the floor. So I think there's been a lot of resistance to that from some people. And I guess I'm a little surprised by that. I believe in the democratic process, being a little naive and not being involved in politics at all.
Well, it's hard to be against transparency.
Right.
What some people argue they long for is the ability of people who are elected to make decisions in a democratic process to be able to compromise and talk about possibilities of a solution to an issue that they might not be able to do if it's all out in the open. Is that part of what the concern is?
Well,
I mean, obviously, I give you an extreme example, New Haven, where nothing's done in public, and that's an extreme example of lack of debate and democracy. But is there a role for sometimes people to just sit quietly, be able to float ideas that might not be politically palatable, just to see where the room is and try to compromise and get stuff done?
I mean, that's definitely an argument for a caucus, right?
Right.
But what that requires,
As a reporter, I hate it. Just for the
Yeah,
record, I don't
yeah.
think anything should ever be private, only because that's my job.
right? Well, I will argue that is a reason for caucuses, right? Especially if you're talking long-term strategy, sometimes you may not have all the answers, and you're just talking around. However, I think the bigger problem is that most municipalities, in at least the smaller ones that I've come to learn, is that they're strong mayor formats, right? So, and a lot of times the legislative body almost takes a back seat to the executive, right? And to even be able to have that debate behind closed doors, there has to be a willingness from the executive side, and even other people on the legislative council, to be willing to have that debate and discussion, right? And I think that's a shift where
Often in small municipalities, the mayor and not always,
Yeah.
but often the legislative body's majority is in accordance with the mayor's similar agenda. They're trying to get stuff
correct,
done.
and a lot of them just accept what the mayor, they defer a lot to the mayor. The legislative bodies are volunteer positions, right? They're part-time. They don't have they're not there full-time, so they defer to the mayor. I think our body is trying to establish more of an equal footing, and making sure that we are exercising our oversight capability and our control over the budget and the purse strings, if you will, to make sure that we are also in agreement with the direction of the town and how we're moving
And we're
forward.
going to get to that, because there's some different ideas about
Yeah,
direction. That's partly what this discussion has been about. It's an important discussion. And we're having that discussion with Cory O'Brien, who's the majority leader. He's a Democrat in Hamden's Legislative Council. He's from the 6th District, which includes Spring Glen and the evil DMV. Let's just put it on the table there. And he's got a primary. So your primary is from Kathleen Shoemaker. Am I saying her name right?
Shoemaker,
And she was on the board, on the council 12 years.
correct,
6 of those years, she was a legislative majority leader, like you.
correct,
She went on to some green jobs with the city.
correct.
And when asked why she's running, she put out a release, and here's what she said. It gets right to the issue you were talking about, so you two have two takes on it. Hearing from friends, colleagues, and neighbors about contentious and negative interactions among current council members and between council and various administrative and professional staff has shown that a reasonable, collaborative voice is needed once again. She said, quote, I am concerned about the adverse impacts such interactions have on Hamden as a community and as a financial entity. I want people to be dependent on my public service experience, dedication to collaboration, commitment to public civility, and respect for our hardworking and dedicated staff. And Mayor Lang talked about that. He's running for election too in a primary, and he's allied with her. And he said he agrees about the civility issue. He feels like his staff people get beat up, that it's good to ask tough questions. He gave the example of Myron Hull, who's a Board of Ed member about to leave. He said he'd ask the toughest questions, but it never felt personal or political, and people weren't worried about asking them except to want to know what they're talking about. And he felt there's an environment now where people are under attack in ways that don't really have to do with the issues under discussion. Is that fair?
I don't think it's fair. I would say we talk about the difference of opinion about transparency, accountability, discussing publicly. So there's a lot of people in town, employees and department heads and officials that kind of feel it's personal if we're highlighting maybe issues with the town, specifics about the budget where we could be doing better. I view a lot of that as accountability, right? I am elected to represent the residents of my district, right? They want to know where our money is being spent, how it's being spent, and how we can do better. And that does require some tough questions being asked. It also requires honest and transparent answers from the administration, which at times haven't been forthcoming. And that's really why I push a little bit harder, right? It's important that we truly understand the picture, the big picture, the whole picture of where we are and how our money is being spent, and what our long-term plans are. And when the administration and some of the town officials don't have answers to those questions or don't truly understand where the money is going and what our resources, our finite resources are doing, I ask tough questions. And part of that is accountability. And we expect answers at the subsequent meetings as well.
And so tell me specifically now, a lot of this has to do with the budget, obviously,
Yes.
right? You have a problem with the mill rate that's among the highest in the state.
Correct.
Higher than New Haven.
Yeah, I believe it's 6th highest in the state.
And you have a lot of long-term debt from people who are not making decisions now with not paying into the pensions. And then, so this came out in the form of a lot of arguments this past year about paying bills, whether the budget included revenues you really were going to get.
Correct.
When funds get transferred, that was one of the big kind of touchy debates when they had an emergency meeting about paying to have the water on at the golf course, whether you're going to pay an electricity bill. The town hall was going to go dark. And from Lang's perspective, at least publicly, was this happens all the time in government. Some counts come over a little under, you transfer them. And from what I heard from you folks was that it was never honestly budgeted in the first place, and that we have to say no at some point so that we get honest budgeting. Is that a fair way to characterize that debate?
Yeah, it is. And I have to push back a little bit on the argument that these decisions were made by people that aren't currently on council, right? For decades, the pension was underfunded, but it's continuing today, right? We borrowed money as the town, borrowed $120 million to fund our pension. The state,
and then we're supposed to pay it back at a rate, and then we got permission not to pay it back at the full rate.
State statute says you have to ramp up to what is considered the actuarially required contribution. That's the bean counters. They tell you if you contribute this much every year, you are on your way to solvency, right, to be fully funded. And the state requires you to do that, to ramp up to that. We got special legislation passed to allow us to prolong that ramp up. But what's even more important, and it's often
But it's going to come at some point.
As of this fiscal year, you have to fully fund it to the actuarial required contribution. However, what's not known and what I've been fighting for transparency and awareness of is that when we borrowed that money, it didn't change the amount of liability to the town, right? We put $120 million liability on the town because we borrowed money. So we have to pay that back plus interest. Also, every
borrowing to pay back borrowing.
Right. We're doing similar to a credit card balance transfer, right? And every year subsequent to that, we've been running deficits anywhere from $4 to $9 million, depending upon the year. And what's happening is we are ramping up our pension payment it's about $3 to $4 million a year that the state requires you to pay additional. So as that $3 to $4 million pension payment is ramping up, a lot of the town is saying, look, we're fixing the problem, but we're also borrowing money on the town side to pay that. So we're still borrowing more money to ramp up that pension payment. So when you look at the overall liabilities, the pension is, I'm going to say, somewhat better funded because we're still losing money every year because this is the first year we're fully funding it. But we're also increasing the debt burden on the town. So we're truly not, from a holistic picture, long-term picture, we're not improving anything.
It's around $1 billion.
So that's if you include some of the future retiree benefits and things like that, where you kind of have some conservative estimates. You also don't know what it is because they're in flux. So it's concrete, I believe 500 and something million that we know changes a little bit with the pension as well. But also there's a lot of flux in the rest of it where it could be as high as $1 billion and it could be, somewhere, a couple 100,000 lower than that.
And how tenable is that load? How does it compare statewide?
So I do know per capita, town debt burden is one of the highest. I don't have the figures in front of me.
So how do you deal with that? Now, what I hear from both sides of this debate, you argued over the tax rate.
Yes.
You said the Lang administration didn't want to hit 50 because they thought that psychologically would be a number, a mill rate of 50, that would drive people from the town. So they got real close. But then you said that it had to be higher than the number he gave because the mayor gave in his proposal because it wasn't being honest about revenues, for instance, expecting too much money coming from Quinnipiac Avenue, Quinnipiac University voluntarily, Yale University voluntarily, that you thought never was going to come. So are both sides not being honest about the 50? I mean, where else does money come from to pay down the debt? Everyone's for economic development. That takes years.
Right.
Then we'll talk about on State Street and other places, Dixwell Avenue, where there's new development. And then Lauren Garrett, who's opposing him for mayor, says a lot more can be done to ramp up economic development. As we've learned in New Haven, where we're doing a lot of economic development, that it still takes years for that to come on your books. There's
Absolutely.
a state law that has a phase-in, which I actually think is a good law. When you improve a property, it doesn't fully get phased into the new tax rate for a bunch of years until you're really able to benefit from it. So what's the real way to get at this?
Well, as anyone that does your basic finances as adults, most of us do, you have to know that the more you borrow, the more you have to pay tomorrow, right? You have to pay that money back. So the most important thing is for us to actually fully pay our bills.
Right. So where's the money going to come from?
The important thing about that is to have that honest discussion, right, and put together a plan, right? I've been telling residents, I've been out knocking doors, introducing myself, furthering discussion with neighbors, and every time I talk to them, I say, look, there's no easy fix. There's not a 1 to 2 year fix to this.
Right.
We're looking at 6, 8, 10 years. There is going to be short-term pain, right? We're going to have a continued high mill rate. There may be either more mill rate increases, reduction in services. Something has to happen that is going to impact us, right? But the importance of having a long-term plan and truly tackling these problems is if you present it to residents, you can say, look, yes, there is going to be short-term pain, but here's how we're going to get out of it. So there's a long-term solution.
Have you heard any real different ideas on long-term solutions? Everyone talks about building up the tax base with a commercial development. Is there any real different idea on either side about that long-term plan? So
the issue is people point to that it's the tax base, it's the grand list, this and that. The true problem
is it to cut government a lot.
Well, the true problem in Hamden is that we've borrowed and we haven't paid our bills, right?
Mm-hmm.
The long-term solution is to reduce our liability. There's no way that you are going to just solely grow out of this problem, right?
Right. So to pay the liability, the money has to come from somewhere.
Right.
It either has to come from higher taxes, which it seems people feel will have a diminishing returns, or cuts.
And
so
it's going to be a mix of both.
Is there something government shouldn't be doing?
Well, so there's been a couple articles about overtime in some departments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hiring additional people, right? I think the mayor proposed hiring 7 new police officers. If we know that we're short, and I will be very clear about this, the mayor and some of the other council, we all know the budget is going to end in a deficit at the end of the year. Huh. The way that the town of Hamden has budgeted.
That already in August. It's the first month of the year.
Absolutely. Going into it, when the mayor signed that budget, he knew it's going to be a deficit at the end of the year. That's the way that Hamden has always budgeted. They've always budgeted to a point where they know there's going to be a deficit. Even if the budget balance, they're underfunding things like the
This
pension.
thing is,
right?
we don't have deficits most year in New Haven. We do have a borrowing problem to fund operating expenses, but really most years have not had a deficit. Just one year when we got less state money than we thought.
Right.
What's the difference?
Inflated, over-optimistic revenues.
Uh-huh.
Right. There's also things that are being budgeted, like they're starting maybe 6 years ago. The budgeting process hasn't included borrowed money in the budget as revenue, right?
So be more honest in the budgeting. What you say. What I often hear is, okay, overtime, which of course gets much more complicated when you have minimum staffing at the fire department, and more importantly, the police. You have the officer involved shooting, you have demonstrations, you had issues about needing greater interaction with the public. It's not going to come cheap, but in the best case scenario, I never hear a big dent. I never hear more than $1 million that you're going to save by tackling overtime. What's the big enchilada? Is there something government has always done that maybe government shouldn't do anymore?
I would say there's not one big thing there's no silver bullet, right? We're going to have to look everywhere, right? Do we need new things in every department, right? And I use the word broadly, things, because maybe we don't need new trucks or new things.
Although, again, those are sometimes long-term investments that do pay off over time.
Right, but that's why I said you need to understand if you need them, right? You don't want to defer buying things if it's going to cost more in the long run, but you should really.
Deferred maintenance is another form of borrowing against the future.
Right, which is happening all the time. We are borrowing money for capital projects, buying both equipment, building repairs, sidewalk repairs, street repairs. We're usually pretty good about spending the street money, but other things, those projects are being canceled, and then the money is being moved around, saying that we've paid back our debt, and allows us to use that borrowed money creatively to close our deficit. So essentially, we're borrowing for projects, not doing the projects, and still having to pay those projects
back. Use the money. And we're talking to Cory O'Brien, Majority Leader of Hamden's Legislative Council, running for a second 2-year term. I was blown away to find out today the guy in such a prominent position. It was his first term in office. What got you into politics? How old are you, Cory? And you were in health IT, right?
I do healthcare IT, medical devices.
Mm-hmm.
Done that for
what do you mean? Is
15 plus years. So the kind of commingled. Just about everything in healthcare nowadays is integrated and very technology driven.
But is there like punctuation there? Healthcare IT / medical devices.
So I think they used to be
ampersand.
I think they used to be two very separate categories, right? Medical devices used to be standalone medical equipment, and then you have the IT side, which is more of like your electronic health records, your software that would assist medicine, and now they're kind of
on your
merging,
Fitbit,
right?
and your watch.
So currently, I do cardiac and physiological monitors. So if you go to the hospital, you get hooked up to something that's taking your vital signs, your heart rate, all that.
15 years. And did you grow up in New Haven?
No, I did not. I grew up in Southern California, Long Beach, so just south of LA.
Here?
So my wife's from New York. She grew up in Queens. We actually met in Costa Rica on vacation.
I've heard that's the best. No army there.
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah. It was nice. So she relocated to California. We lived there for 7 years together while we were here. Her brother-in-law got a job at Quinnipiac, moved up here with her sister. Mom retired, moved here. We had our youngest child, and my wife said she wanted to be closer to her family, so we ended up in Hamden.
And it was a good place to raise a family. How many years ago was that?
8 years. Actually, as of this morning on Facebook, I saw the reminder of my going away moving party was today, 8 years ago.
So what got you to think 2 years ago it's time for me to run for a local political office?
So I've always, ever since I can remember, I've always voted in elections. I've always been kind of a junkie for national politics and somewhat state politics.
Watching that map in 2016 in the New York Times webpage where they'd always have the aggregation of polls.
I mean,
we all watched that.
We all watched those,
and our heart rates went up and down by the minute for months.
I mean, I remember on my 21st birthday, right after I turned 21, was George W. Bush, or H.W. Bush, the younger one, I can't remember, was being elected, and even younger, I remember going to the bar to console my sorrows. So I've always been involved, never really municipal or local. I've always wanted to do more, but I think we all get complacent on the couch and just complain. And then really, the what I feel was the ongoing financial kind of mismanagement of the town, the way we're doing our budgeting, how it's broken. spurred me into action. But also, Trump being elected. I feel
Well, that
like
happened with a number of people
Yeah.
in Hamden. Isn't that how Hamden Progressive Act
Yes.
Hampan came from people saying we're going to act locally
Yeah.
with our upset about the Trump election nationally.
And I think you look back at the entire time that Obama was in office, Republicans were upset, especially
Tea
the far
Party.
left Tea Party.
Far right.
Far right, yes, sorry. And then they started, organizing locally. And you look at the state legislatures, local governments across the country. They just took over across those couple years. And I think a lot of people are looking back and saying, why were we sitting on our hands and not doing anything? And we were kind of shamed into action, if you will, right? Those of us that probably should have done more sooner. And I felt like my skill set, right? I talked about I'm in business. I have experience with budgets and managing large teams and complex projects. I also have an MBA for an education, right? So I understand financial statements, all of that. And I just felt like my skill set, would lend me most to help out on the legislative council. I think I have a passion for education. My wife's a high school teacher. I would have liked to do Board of Ed, but I do think my skill set lends me more towards the legislative council with the budgeting, and that's why I chose to go there. And I've spent almost 100% of my focus in the first 2 years on the budget alone.
Yeah, budget's been your issue. And so Trump got you upset, and you decided to focus locally and have a constructive reaction.
Correct.
So what's interesting to me is, and I say this to every guest that comes on, so Hampan is part of a group statewide that tries to elect progressive candidates to state office and state legislature. And they have an agenda that includes higher minimum wage,
Correct.
bigger taxes on the wealthy, paid family leave. When they and I don't think this is inconsistent, it's just interesting that when their attention turns locally, it's fiscal austerity. Less spending, less tax.
I have
and
to
you
push
can't-
back on austerity.
You can't print tax.
Yeah.
You can't print money in your town.
Right.
So it's not that the state prints money, but the state has, covers a whole state,
Right.
not just distressed areas. And you have tipping points at mill rates here that people leave, so you don't get
Right.
more money coming in.
Yeah.
So you don't think there's you don't think there's an interesting.
So I'll push back on the word austerity, right? I do not believe in austerity cuts, and I also don't use the word fiscally conservative. I'm fiscally responsible, right?
Okay.
And I believe we need to have sustainable budgeting, which means we're not just looking at today; we're looking at long term, right? And the reason why I am so adamant about fiscal responsibility and sustainability is because I am a very progressive Democrat, and we can't do progressive things without the money, right? So when we are having these slimmed down budgets and people are talking about austerity cuts and talking about cutting services, a lot of those services that less fortunate people can't need, right? I argue that we need to get our fiscal house in order instead of wastefully spending on things like overtime, right? We should be funneling that money to the people that need it. And some of the people that need it are retirees that have these ridiculously high property tax, right? I mean, we need to ensure that when people
talk about
retire.
expanding the credit for seniors.
Correct.
You'd like state permission to do that. That's something you agree with?
Absolutely. As the town is looking for ways to solve these fiscal challenges that we're in, we have people that are on fixed incomes, right? And they're already stretched to the limit in a lot of cases. And really, you can't rely on them to help fix the burden. Even though when you look historically, they benefited from years where the mill rate should have been just a little bit higher, and we would have not had these problems. But the reality is nowadays they have fixed incomes, and we really need to make sure.
And you
that
want
they're
them to
not
stay in their home because
Absolutely.
younger people when the tax go up, you say you can sell your house. Your house is
Right.
worth more. There's a
Right.
value, and that's why it happened. In New
Right.
Haven, certain areas of town they go up, but the houses are worth more. In other
Right.
parts of the value didn't go
Right.
up.
Right.
Arden House, were you there last week when the nursing home had an event saying we want to stay in business? The state wants to shut us down.
Unfortunately, I was not. I was out of town for work.
So SEIU 1199, healthcare worker, they got politicians from both parties.
Mhm.
Mayor Kurt Lang, Democrats, State
Yep.
Senator Jared Logan, saying that we got to save this nursing home because it's got 370 good jobs. You got a lot of older people really love it there.
Right.
But the state says that if we really want to keep our fiscal house in order, and these are Democrats, they're saying you got to have enough people in those beds to have it worth it if we're going to do the reimbursements because of all the overhead that's required to run these nursing homes. And it got some pretty bad reviews. It's a 4-company profit chain that runs it, Genesis Healthcare. So while there was all this bipartisan support for it, our reporter was at the event. He spoke to one union activist who didn't want to be named because it wasn't the subject of the day, who said she thinks that Genesis is a country's largest bed holder, and she thinks Genesis just wants a chance to play this out and then bow out of Arden House and make it seem like it wasn't their fault, it was the state's fault, while Arden House has messed it up, and that a greedy corporation is basically didn't come through for seniors and has everybody blaming the state instead. Is that a fair take?
So I will say that I am not as fully versed in the state changes and the impact of Arden House.
I mean, it's a big impact.
Right. It is a big
hundreds of
impact,
people
right.
at Arden
Absolutely.
House, families depend
Absolutely.
on it.
But it is important that when even the state looks to balance their budget and be more fiscally responsible, that it doesn't come at the cost or expense of those that need it the most, right? It shouldn't impact kids. It shouldn't impact people that either seniors or those that need health care. So I have mixed feelings about this, right? If the company is looking for an out, then maybe that's not it's a little disingenuous. But the state also shouldn't be impacting those that need help the most.
All right, but I've loved this conversation, Cory. Are you supporting running for president in the Democratic primaries?
So I am a very progressive liberal Democrat. So I would say I'm leaning towards Bernie and Elizabeth Warren.
A lot of people who were for Bernie last time are for Elizabeth Warren this time. Kind of feel like Bernie set the agenda. His days passed, and she's sharper and got more done with Consumer Finance Protection Bureau and savvy.
I was a Bernie supporter last time, but I have always liked Elizabeth Warren as well. I think either one of those would further the progressive agenda. But I have been a fan of Bernie Sanders for years while he was in the Senate.
When I was in college, I made a pilgrimage up to Burlington when he was first elected at 81. I was writing for an alt weekly, and Bernie let me spend a day with him to see how he was going to get hospitals to do more in poor neighborhoods.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
I love the guy.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I wonder why he still has that Brooklyn accent when his adult life
I know,
he's been
right?
far from Brooklyn. I wonder, is it almost genetic?
I'm sure it is, right? My wife's New York accent comes out frequently.
She's
sometimes.
Queens.
Yeah, it comes out.
Well, Cory O'Brien, what a pleasure to talk to you today. Thanks for coming on Dateline Hamden. I hope you come back.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for all the local coverage you've done for Hamden. It's something that's sorely missing in a lot of places in this country, and the coverage of Hamden has been amazing by the New Haven
Thank
Independent.
you. And our reporter Sam Gert will be back from his stint as a clown on the streets of Toronto. And he'll be back in September.
Well, welcome back, even in clown outfit.
Okay. I want to thank Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program, and of course, the miracle man behind the controls, WNHA station manager Harry Droz. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.